Hello, and on behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, What About Your Data? New Cloud Services Opportunities for Data Protection, presented by Grant Jacobson, Director of Technology Alliances for Cloudian, Rich Wilson, Principal Architect for Cloudian, and Steve Firms, Solutions Architect for Veeam. Thank you for participating in today's webcast and for your continued support in the Global VMUG program. Grant, let's get started. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for taking time for this presentation. This should be a very valuable use of your time and hopefully very meaningful. So I'll introduce myself, Grant Jacobson with Cloudian. We'll be talking today about new cloud service opportunities, specifically around data protection services. Very timely these days, given the threat to data and the need, of course, to protect that. So let me just move right into the presentation. So as I said, I'm from Cloudian. If you're not familiar with Cloudian, we're an independent software company based in California. We make software for object storage, and we were selected by VMware as the first object storage for their Cloud Director platform. So for VMware Cloud providers, there's now a brand new option for cloud storage, object storage from VMware, and that's with the Cloudian software. Again, if you're not familiar, we're probably the industry's leading compatibility with the S3 protocol, which is really important given the surging number of applications now connecting with S3. Cloudian software has a very rich set of service provider features, including multi-tenant and QoS and billing. So that was designed from the beginning, and so it's a really great fit for service providers. And we've got over 100 service providers currently running Cloudian software in their environment. Last point here on the right, Gartner Peer Insights, that's really customers going on the Gartner site and saying what they think. And for 2020, Cloudian was selected as the highest rated object storage vendor, and actually by Gartner based on these reviews. So let me turn real quickly to Steve Firmis from Veeam, and he'll introduce Veeam.
Thanks, Grant, and thanks everyone for joining us. So yes, last year definitely was a tremendous year for Veeam. Last year we exceeded $1 billion in booking. We're also in 160 countries with over 375,000 customers. Now, in the bottom right, you'll see our Net Promoter Score of 75. So, what that indicates is, of our 375,000 plus customers, they're extremely willing to recommend Veeam to others. So they're very, happy with Veeam and how we're working with them. So that's Veeam, and I'll pass it back to Grant.
Very good. Thank you. So I think a good way to start here is, since we're talking about cloud service and cloud service providers, is really to take a look at some of the top challenges currently facing these companies, these organizations, in a fairly dynamic environment. Of course, the amount of data volume continues to grow, which is exacerbating the storage costs. There's brand new data requirements, regulated requirements around the data, depending on the country you're in. That's compliance, that's privacy, and other regulated policies that are needed when storing data. Certainly the need to ensure protection and the ability to recover quickly when needed is always going to be with us. You can't lose your data and continue on. So that's paramount. The underlying infrastructure, of course, is very complex, continues to grow in complexity, and so any way to simplify that and the management of the data is a really good thing, especially when it also comes with taking out cost of that infrastructure. Part of the way that can be done is with a scalable architecture, and also the need for security. And that's everything from just making sure the data does not accidentally get deleted or get deleted by an attack, such as a ransomware attack. So having security in the software at the system level in other places really important there. And of course, last on the list is this idea of an integrated solution. So if there are revenue-ready services that can be deployed today, that's perfect. That addresses all of these issues, and it happens that that's what we're going to tell you about. So let me move to the next slide here. So there was a survey done by the Enterprise Strategy Group asking cloud providers about and also enterprise customers, you know, what purposes did your organization use cloud infrastructure for? And it turns out that almost half answered for data backup and archive. Disaster recovery, which is another flavor of that, was 36%. So cloud services and data protection is already the #1 cloud use case out there. And if I go to the next slide, a little more on that, you see a rising trend of the percentage of backups actually being done in the cloud. That's according to the same survey by ESG. 74% of the respondents use cloud backups for their on-premises workload, and 23% this year expect that to be, 23% of those backups are expected to be in the cloud. So there's a very good fit and a number of reasons why cloud services for data protection is a good fit and actually already underway. Let me kind of zoom out a little bit with respect to market view. Cloud data protection services is a set of storage services, obviously, storage where that data is living. And according to IDC, that market today is roughly $20 billion worldwide. But what's staggering here on this picture is there's a 32% annual growth, so that the market will triple just in a few years, by 2023. So it's a large market, fast growing, and a lot of that market for these storage-based services is driven by the need for data protection. And so let's just take a quick look at that. That's about a $15 billion opportunity today, and you can see on the slide that the largest piece of that, roughly half, is comprised of the data backup and recovery. Related to that, at the second level, second largest is the data management piece of that. But all of these together add up to data protection, and that's a tremendous opportunity for cloud providers today. So what are those opportunities here, and what we'll be telling you about in detail after this slide here is the idea of a joint solution with Veeam and Cloudian running on VMware, and that is all of these various services shown on the left can be carved out of the platform. So you have even basic storage as a service, which is the Cloudian storage running in the VMware environment with the cloud provider. So it's S3 storage, and the idea there is very similar to the S3 from AWS. You have an S3 compatible storage now available from VMware Cloud Service Providers. Adding Veeam to that, then you get a backup as a service or an archive as a service. With those security features I was referring to, you can then even offer a compliance as a service, say for healthcare data, where you have to keep that data for 7 years or 20 years, and it must comply with, in the US, for example, that's HIPAA. Just going down the list here, you have disaster recovery as a service, which is really backup with multiple locations. Big data as a service, where storage is really important. That's another one. The last two are fairly new these days. Ransomware protection as a service for the ransomware attacks that are happening multiple times a minute around the world. And then finally, Office 365 protection as a service to actually back up that Office 365 data, which many people think is backed up, but it's actually not backed up. So all of these running on the Veeam Cloudian platform with VMware or as it says, revenue-ready services that can help customers with their data protection needs. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Rich Wilson.
Great, thank you, Grant. Just a quick overview of our VMware Object Storage platform through the VCPP program. It's a VMware Cloud Provider program, part of the partner program, providing a consumption-based licensing model for accessing the VMware solutions for the purpose of providing and hosting the managed services. Now, if you provide a hosted service, you should probably already be a VCPP partner. So the core topic of these sections is how Cloudian integrates with VCPP. In this instance, we'll be reviewing the object storage extension for VMware Cloud Director. VMware Cloud Director is VMware's flagship cloud service delivery platform for cloud providers. It is a cloud provisioning, tenant self-service portal, and management interface for any VMware-based environment. vCloud Director has certain core capabilities, multi-site management capabilities, multi-tenant operational efficiencies, Kubernetes support, workflow automation, tight interoperability with VMware's core stack, and more. Again, the idea is to create a cloud service delivery platform from core VMware technologies. Most importantly, vCloud Director is an open and extensible with robust service integration capabilities. While interoperability with VMware is a strength, we realize that our growth will come from integration with third parties like Cloudian. The likes of data protection vendors, automation techniques, security and networking companies, and more. And more on that in a few minutes. Cloudian brings VMware Cloud Provider partners the opportunity to offer object storage as a service, as Grant mentioned, through our service delivery platform, VCD. VCD being short for vCloud Director. For the first time, our cloud provider partners can access a true scale-out object storage solution via VCPP points. We integrate Cloudian with our object storage extension in order to provide the new service offering within VCD. VMware developed the object storage extension plugin for VCD in order to make the object storage resources available to the provider administrator, to the tenants, and to end users through the VCD GUI. A lot of the common administration tasks can be performed in VCD instead of opening the Cloudian UI for every task. This greatly simplifies our most common tasks and lowers the provider's operational costs for day 2 operations. You see here that Cloudian can be deployed with or without VCD. I want to emphasize that VCD integration is a new service offering delivery point and is not a mandatory component. We like to tell partners that Cloudian is the star of this show. The VCD integration allows our provider partner to differentiate themselves from other providers. This new offering not competing with vSAN or your other shared storage. They both serve different workloads and there is very little, if any, overlap. These technologies should be complementary to each other. Your customers will not be using OBS object storage to run live VMs. We are not the primary data store target. You should not be using vSAN or other traditional arrays to store a large amount of unstructured data. These platforms serve different purposes. Let's take a deeper look at how this works. So the management integration points that are included are creating users and groups, creating buckets where the content is stored, accessing policies to users and groups, which include quality of service, encryption, defining quotas, as well as reporting capabilities for the number of storage bytes, stored objects, and usage by tenant and end users within the system. One feature that makes the solution great as it is single sign-on. Once you're logged into the provider tenant portal, the organization admins and tenants, they can be directly connected and have that single sign-on capability to the Cloudian interface. So here's a layout of how the object storage extension is deployed and the RESTful APIs that are provided. Most importantly is the S3 API and a JSON-based API for the object storage administration, tying back to Cloudian's administrative API. The object storage extension is a standalone middleware service running on a VOSE appliance server. This is a scale-out model. The appliance contains the OSE middleware and a relational database, Postgres, and the middleware is Java-based. So the OSE act as a proxy, so all S3 traffic through VCD will go back through the object storage extension middleware and then back to Cloudian HyperStore, providing the S3 backends. The OSE is utilizing the AWS Java SDK to connect to HyperStore. And to improve performance, the object storage extension caches some data and it stores some of the object metadata as well in the relational database. Play a quick demo of how this views for end users. This is a previous version 1.0. So from a provider access organizational admin, you can see the associated tenants, look at reports by different metrics, the top 3 buckets by storage used or storage count or object count. And we can see the mouse over will show there's not much data here, but then we can look over and top 3 users by the same metrics of storage used, bucket count, and object count. The next one here is a view of the bucket view. So as an admin, you can come in and switch between sites. So we are site aware. So deploying virtual object storage extension can be, site aware, a scale out model again. And here you directly from the tenant portal, we can create buckets. And that bucket can then be consumed by additional, by that user or that tenant. There's also additional functionality to synchronize the data to repopulate the cache, update any information that was stored within the object storage on the back end. So interfacing with a bucket, you can access the objects, retrieve the additional metadata for the objects, associate tags, key value pairs, and these key value pairs will be stored within the object storage extension database, as well as synchronized back to the object storage metadata within HyperStore. So there's key value tags as well as metadata tags. Managing security credentials is also accomplished through the user interface here. We can generate new keys or deactivate credentials, assign new keys to individual users, and application level credentials. Application credentials would be for a service account, so that a particular application is not a human user, and you want to associate static keys for them. Finally, there is a virtual app integration and virtual catalogs. So VApps can be stored back into the object storage. So VApps that are not active, rather. So cold VApps that are consuming space on the vSAN or tier 1 storage could be archived to the object storage to free up that space. You can upload from local files to also store, the OVA images for VApps as well, and individual VMs. And then once you have data into the catalog, that can be published and shared within the tenants. So the technical documentation is available at cloudian.com/VMware-docs, as well as within the VMware standard support documentation portal. So please refer to the OSE design guide, which has sizing and performance information, as well as a great planning tool for the deployment. Finally, the different summary of all the capabilities and offerings from management, reporting, multiple use cases, and user management are all capable built into the object storage extension. The API integration points covering S3 using our integrated IAM API. This is the IAM Identity Access Management service that runs built into Cloudian HyperStore, as well as integrations to the HyperStore admin API covering creating groups, provisioning groups and users, defining regions, defining storage policies, and reporting data for objects, buckets, and bytes. So the different deployment options available are with VCD, and then with VCD, Cloudian can be either running on existing services with a software-only model, or as virtual machines for smaller deployments, or on the Cloudian hardware platform, having the software metered by usage integrated with VCD. And then without VCD, Cloudian can run, again, as VMs on existing servers or bare metal, and our appliance offerings as well. And then the management is not through VCD, but through the Cloudian user interface. So now we're going to talk about Cloudian HyperStore S3 Object Lock. With our 7.2 release, HyperStore can now implement the worm write once, read many protection for storage objects by supporting the standard AWS S3 Object Lock functionality. To use the object lock within HyperStore, we must have a separate object lock license. It's a flat cost. And then it also requires to enable the HyperStore shell, which is a secure shell that requires disabling the root account password on all of the HyperStore nodes. And then for more information, there's a prerequisite section within our online user guide that's available. So we have native S3 object lock starting in 7.2, released late last year. And so once the objects are written in, the write once, read many policies can be applied, and that'll be discussed a little bit further by Steve's examples. Objects are made immutable, so that really just means that they're unchangeable for a certain period of time, which is defined when you are writing in the individual object. So Veeam provides this capability built in. Once object lock is enabled, then we support the standard S3 API calls, and Veeam implements the same. Using these methods, using the object lock headers and verbs, third-party applications like Veeam can enable the object lock on the buckets. This needs to be done when the bucket is first created, which it enables versioning on the bucket. And it can only be enabled on newly created buckets. So any pre-existing data would need to be migrated in order to support object lock, just migrating it to an object lock enabled bucket. And then once that is done, it's using versioning, and then the retention policies can be defined. So Veeam will back up that object and define the parameters for legal hold, or just a baseline retention period, 90 days or whatever is required for that customer. So the workflow is really, creating a ransomware protected workflow. It's pretty simple, straightforward for the Veeam integration. Cloudian would be connected as a sober backup repository to Veeam's via the cloud tier. Veeam initiates the backup. And then during the backup initiation, the admin can specify right through the backup workflow that it's an object lock backup, and also specify the time frame for which data will remain locked. This automatically creates a locked bucket on the Cloudian HyperStore in compliance mode with the policy time frame inherited from what was specified by Veeam. The backup is now immutable for the period of time specified, and is ransomware or malware protected, and can be used to restore a clean copy in the event of an attack. However, it's not enough to simply have storage locking down objects if hackers can compromise the system. So we are a truly hardened solution There are strict requirements on what qualifies as a worm-enabled storage defined by the regulators worldwide. So the SEC Rule 17A4 specifies even a root access should not be enabled to delete data from the storage system to be considered worm. So that's why we require disabling the root password, and as well as running our core underlying HyperStore shell. So Cloudian is successfully compliant based on these government regulations for worm, the US government. Verified by Cohasset Associates. They've given us our assessment certifying SEC Rule 17A4, FINRA Rule 4511, CFTC Regulation 1.31. And these are the rules and detailing requirements for assessment as worm storage, as well as other security-related capabilities. So we ship with the host system level security features, including secure shell, integrated firewall, role-based access control, and IAM identity access management access controls. And this enables the lockdown of the root access of the system. And from here, I'm going to transition to Steve.
All right, thanks, Rich. So as Rich mentioned, Veeam's integration with Cloudian's HyperStore, it's centered around what we call our capacity or cloud tier. Now, in January 2019, we introduced this capacity tier feature, and what this did is it allowed us at the time to have what we call a move mode. And this was, as its name implies, it gave us the ability to move data from what we call our performance tier, which is your on-site high-performing disk target that you can restore from, to the capacity tier, which is in this case the Cloudian HyperStore. Now, earlier this year in February, actually, seems like forever ago, it was only a few months ago, we launched version 10, VBR version 10. Now in version 10, we introduced the immutability that we've been talking about, as well as what we call our copy mode, which, again, as the name implies, copies data from the performance tier to the capacity tier. And I'll go into those in some gory detail in a few minutes. So with the capacity tier, like I mentioned, we had these immutability capabilities, which again uses the S3 APIs, and this copy mode, which like I said, I'll go into the details in a few seconds. But the reason we introduced the copy mode was it satisfied our 3-2-1 rule, which 3 copies of data, 2 locations, 1 offsite. What that does is when we did the move, you didn't always have data in 2 locations, right? Because it would be in spot A and then move to spot B. With version 10, we introduced the copy. Now the copy mode now does satisfy our 3-2-1 rule. Now, as far as the configuration, setting this up, as Rich mentioned, it's very straightforward, very simple. So when you're creating your repositories and you're creating the server, you can go in, you can see we have this capacity tier screen. And what it does is literally you check a checkbox and say, yep, enable this. You choose your HyperStore. And then you see we have our 2 modes. You have the copy mode and the move mode. As I'll explain, you can use those in conjunction with each other. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can use both. And then, if you're going to be sending the data, we strongly recommend that you encrypt your data when you're sending it offsite. Now, Rich mentioned the buckets and how you create it and set up within Veeam, and then it gets created on the HyperStore. So, here's the example again, how easy it is, right? You go in, you give it a name, create a folder that you're going to store the data in, and then you select the immutable button and you pick a number of days. That's it. You go through those couple check boxes and a few characters of typing, and you're ready to go with Veeam and Cloudian. As Rich mentioned, our SOBR, right, which is our scale out backup repository. The premise of the SOBR is, again, it scales as you grow your environment. Well, with this capacity tier and the ability to move the data or copy the data to the capacity tier, truly does make the scale out repository infinitely scalable, if you would. What's great about it is that, we've built into the capability, explain we have this concept of shells. When we move the data, we actually, create a shell. I'll go into the details. But the idea is this is going to help, any sort of, network traffic. If your HyperStore is in a secondary location, it's going to minimize the network traffic, as well as these shells. Everything you can do restoration-wise, you can, with the files on site, you can do with the shells as well. So you don't lose any feature function or capability when you do this. Additionally, we've built in what we call our intelligent block recovery. And this is where, based on the metadata, Veeam's going to know where the blocks are. So we put a priority on restoring from the local or non-offloaded copy of data. So again, if you were to have some backup data and pointers on site, we're going to restore those first before we pull anything down from the remote site from your HyperStore. So I'll go through and explain these backup chains. So what we have is inactive backup chains, right? So that's when a file can be moved from your on-site performance store to your object storage in your HyperStore. So when is an inactive backup chain? In the case of if you're doing a forward incremental, let's say, the previous backup chain becomes inactive once a new full has been created. So you have your previous full and all of the relevant incrementals, those will then become inactive. With a reverse incremental chain, it's always going to be you're going to have your most recent full and your previous two reverse incrementals are going to be there, the two VRB files. Anything else is going to be what we consider inactive, and they will be eligible to be sent to the object storage. Now, if you're using grandfather, father-son methodology and files, those will become immediately inactive just by their nature. So if you were to create a yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, you're going to list, those will be immediately eligible to be moved off to your object storage. When I mentioned the shells, so how it works is, when we do the move piece, we're actually going to move the metadata, copy metadata, I'm sorry, we're going to copy the metadata to the HyperStore. Then we're going to move the backup data itself, the objects. And what this is going to do, it's going to leave behind this shell, as I referred to in the earlier slides. So when any sort of restore, anything needs to take place, the metadata in your capacity tier, and it's there. So if anything happens to performance tier, if you had an outage of the site or for whatever reason it was inaccessible, you can still restore and do everything you want off of the capacity tier because it's fully self-described. Now, to go into some example of how this would work. So in this case, I'm going to use 3 days as my rule for when files will be eligible to be moved off-site. So I'm going to do my first synthetic full on Monday. I'm going to do an incremental on Tuesday, another incremental on Wednesday. There's my 3 days and my operational window is satisfied. So now when I do Thursday's incremental, now Monday's drops out of that window. So if you notice it's not being moved yet. Now I do another incremental on Friday, you can see the window moves. Now on Saturday, I do my next synthetic full. This will now make the previous files inactive, and that will allow Monday's data, Tuesday's data, and Wednesday's data to be sent off-site. And you'll see our index off-site was updated, so now we know what was being sent over. Now on Sunday, I do another incremental, that drops Thursday's off, so Thursday's data gets moved. And now on Monday, Friday's gets moved over. So now my entire backup chain is moved over to the Cloudian. Now I talked about the 3-2-1 and how the restore points with the move weren't always in both locations, but now with version 10, we do the copy mode. Now the files are going to be in both locations along with the metadata. So it truly is a copy, and so as soon as the backup file is created locally, it's going to get copied off to the Cloudian, and at that point, your data is in both locations. And again, that whole priority of the on-site still is in play. So now, when I talk about the copy mode, how is this going to actually work? So the same idea with the copy mode is you have, again, your backup file locally. As soon as that file is closed and being written on site, both now the metadata and the backup data are now both going to be copied off to the Cloudian HyperStore device. So again, now to dive into this in a little more detail, how's this going to work? So again, Monday, full backup, all stuff is copied, metadata and data is copied over to Cloudian. Tuesday are incremental, Wednesdays are incremental, Thursdays are incremental, now Fridays. Now on Saturday, I'm going to do a synthetic full. So in this case, if you notice in the little lines at the bottom, the synthetic full, is comprised of, A, F, I, and G as my data blocks. A, F, and G already were moved, or in this case, copied over to the Cloudian. So the only new chunk of data that has to be sent is going to be I. So you can see in the diagrams that we're going to point back to the metadata and the object for the previous blocks, and we're going to update our index. So now everything is synchronized. We're ready to go. Do a new incremental on Sunday, and a new incremental on Monday, and those blocks are copied over, just as we explained. So I mentioned a few times that the copy mode and the move mode can be done together. Now, the reason that you'd want to do this is, certainly the copy is going to get you that immediate, synchronization of the on-site and with your HyperStore. But combining it with the move mode, it's going to still give you that benefit of, let's say you were to say, I want to keep 14 days of my backup data locally on my high performance tier. But after 14 days, I want to move them, off to the Cloudian. Well, when it does the move, well, the data is already there, so it's not going to actually move any data. But what it's going to do is it's going to, change the metadata and actually delete the files off of the, or shell them off of the local storage. So that way you still get the benefits of having the 3-2-1 rule satisfied, as well as having the freeing up space on your performance tier. So you get the best of both worlds by combining the two modes. Now, Rich talked a lot about security. So absolutely, as I mentioned, Veeam certainly recommends the encryption. So that when the data is in flight, we'll have it encrypted, as well as taking advantage of the immutability. So, the Cloudian HyperStore is has this implemented, and as Rich explained, they do a tremendous job of locking things down. So when you turn on immutability on their device, it really is locked down pretty secure. So within Veeam, because we use the compliance mode, well, what if you had a malicious admin wanted to go into Veeam and try to delete your data or do something malicious? Well, they can't, right? So the first thing is you can't turn it off once it's been turned on for a bucket that's been written to. It won't let you. Then if you decide, well, I'm going to actually delete my backup data, again, it will not allow you to delete it. So this is a great way to prevent from both ransomware and or a malicious character in the environment. So combining the Veeam capabilities with the capabilities that our partner Cloudian provides, it's a rock solid solution. So that's it for the Veeam stuff. I'll pass it over to Rich.
Actually, that's Grant. Back to me. Thank you. So a very good story at a technical level on both Veeam and Cloudian providing an integrated offering that can then be leveraged for these new data protection service opportunities. And what's interesting and what makes this cost effective and kind of simplifies the environment is this combination of Veeam and Cloudian together in your VMware environment can be leveraged for all of these services. As I said earlier, whether it's just backup and archive, it's really just what Steve described per your policy. One key difference, of course, is the archive is really for much longer term storage, and that could be on Cloudian at a different location, or it could be at your tenant's location. So and that gets into the disaster recovery as a service as well. So a lot of these are all, again, built on the same platform, just implemented with different features and offered with different SLAs and so on. So this is really the set of services that can be considered. And as it says kind of on the right, you'll see that anyone with lots of data or data intensive applications across these different market segments is a candidate for these services, whether it is public sector, healthcare, I mentioned, financial services has a lot of regulated data. Legal firms are being targeted lately by the ransomware attackers, and because they have very valuable information, of course. So that's another key area, but really just about any segment with data is where this opportunity lies. So Rich went through briefly the object lock, S3 object lock and how that works. He did mention that was a separate license, and I'll highlight here that until between now and July 31st, that's being offered to VMware cloud providers at no cost. So that's about a $15,000 value, and that is provided at no cost with a new order with the minimum commitment at 200 terabytes, which is not a lot, but it's very nice to get started. And what I'll say is that the license itself is good for the life of the cluster. So once you have that license with your cluster, that is kind of a permanent license availability. And again, the object lock is what makes the ransomware protection, the Office 365 protection, all of this a gold standard, because it does become completely immutable, as both Rich and Steve outlined. So how to get started if you haven't already, very, very simple. It's really about thinking about how much storage you want to consume. And we covered this briefly earlier, but I'll just emphasize that this really is priced for Cloudian as a pay-as-you-go. It's a consumption type pricing, so you only have to pay for what you use, and just decide what that minimum level is. Order through VMware. Cloudian provides the software, which includes support. We also have optional installation services, typically not needed, but if you want, that's available as well. The object storage extension that Rich talked about, the VOSE, that's available at no cost from VMware. So if you're using Cloud Director, that comes from VMware. Again, as Rich said, Cloudian can be deployed without Cloud Director. If you're still thinking about that, it works the same. It's priced the same, and has the regular interface that comes with the product. And again, this can work on your existing hardware. If you're just getting started, that's fine. It can run as a VM or on bare metal. It can also run on Cloudian appliances, and all that can be mixed and matched, different sizes, very flexible way to do that. Finally, this is sort of monthly billing, and that's just, again, based on your usage. So as a summary, really, these are very profitable services because the underlying platform is extremely cost effective. So high margin, revenue ready, available today. The integrated solution, you can start with just backup as a service and add these other services as you need it. And again, this is proven today in service provider environments. References available. And there's a lot more information on the Cloudian and Veeam websites to learn more. We also will have these slides available to you. They're actually in the handout section here, along with some other collateral. So if you haven't clicked on that on your little GoToWebinar interface, you can download those now. Here's a few more links to free trials, to more technical docs, both on the Cloudian site and the VMware site. Again, all this is in your slides. And for Cloudian, more information depending on where you are in the world. Here are some nice guys who will be glad to talk to you with their contact details. And I think that's it. Now we can go to questions if there's any.
Okay, Grant, someone did just post a couple of questions in. The first question is, if we have existing customers on both VCD and our Cloudian implementation, is it easy to tie them together in the VCD interface, or are we looking at significant reconfiguration per tenant?
Rich, you want to take that?
Sure. No. Yeah. Definitely. Existing tenants can be provisioned with object storage and have them enabled. The provider would be able to enable the object storage for each tenant and user. So no significant migration required for any users.
Okay, he's also asking, if we have existing VCD and Cloudian environments, do we have to deploy something for the VOSE, or is it more just linking what we have together?
Yes, the object storage extension needs to be deployed. That's the middleware, and it's a virtual machine. It has the built-in relational database, and that could be distributed across sites and be enabled across certain sites.
Okay, and then when a customer archives or catalogs a VApp to object storage, does it need to convert thin provision disks to thick before this archive function?
Yeah, I mean, if the question,
I don't believe there's a conversion process to archive a inactive VApp.
Okay, and then is it okay to ask about the Veeam backup for 0365 using S3 storage, or is that out of the scope of today?
Not out of the scope. We can certainly talk about it. I'll start, and then Rich and Steve, please chime in. There is a reference to that on the Cloudian website. It's Office 365 protection. It is available as a service. You know, it's available as a solution, but from a cloud provider perspective, as a service. And really, it is just a direct connect between the Veeam product, which Steve will say what that is, and I think it's called Veeam Backup for Office 365. And it's very elegant and covers all the data. So that's available today. Over to you, Steve and Rich.
sure. So, you know, VBO definitely can use the Cloudian HyperStore or any S3 compatible target, you know, as a repository. Right now, you cannot use Immutability, but you can use an S3 target for VBO, if that was a question.
Anything to add to that, Rich?
No, it's a standard deployment, so VBO can archive to Cloudian S3.
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. And by the way, just a little more about the Cloudian, whether it's with the object lock or not, and whether for the Office 365 or any of these other services, that same Cloudian storage can be used and leveraged across not just these data protection services, but really any S3 workload, any application that needs data storage. So you can actually share that, carve it up across the tenants even, and just leverage that, which makes it even more cost effective. There's a single global namespace for the single site or multiple sites, depending on how you've deployed it. And that provides this unified visibility and control over that data, again, for all of these different workloads.
Okay, there's another question. Is the 15K license for 1 year?
That's
No.
a perpetual one-time cost.
It's a one-time cost if you're buying it. Again, we're making that available today and through the end of July at no cost. So the value is there, and it is active for the life of the cluster. So once you have it, there's no additional cost for that object lock capability.
Okay, well, it looks like all of the questions have been addressed either by you guys on the call or in the GoToWebinar question panel. So I guess I'll just take a moment to say thank you to the speakers for taking the time to speak to us today. And from all of us here at VMUG, thank you and have a great rest of your day.